probably know, change is the only thing that's constant. So we are fortunate today to have Bill, Sidong, is that right? Okay. I've got his citation here, but I will not get involved too much. All I can say is I went through their website and I noticed that he's been in Fiji for a couple of times. He's been involved with Indigenous Golden Fund, Fiji Electricity Authority, and he is here at USP on attachment, and I think some of you are his students. And he's got a very, very broad and wide range on change management. And he's going to be sharing that experience with us this afternoon. And I now will welcome Bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, distinguished guests and the students. Always notice all over the world our rooms always fill up from the back first, and so there's no exception in Fiji. Okay, I'm just finishing giving 30 hours by 3 to groups of people, so I've tried to summarise that, and I'm just going to give you a bit of a brain dump, but at the same time I'm interested in questions later on. So we'll start off, that's just a bit of background myself. But basically, I've got over 600 worldwide clients in different areas. I've just come from, before here I was in PNG, I'm going to the Solomons end of this month, so more recently a lot of work in the Pacific area. Okay, they're the list of the companies we've dealt with in the Pacific area. You can sort of see quite a few Fijian companies there. I first came to Fiji in 2001. Joe Maher invited me to help him with his changes in FEAs, and also went with him to TFL and quite a few other organisations like LTA, etc. as well. Okay, we'll start off. These guys are all successful entrepreneurs. What have they got in common, other than they made a lot of money? All very successful entrepreneurs. Anybody got any ideas? Those who attended the earlier sessions are not allowed to answer this question.
They're all men.
They're all men. That's yeah. There's something else that's rather unique. That's a good point. Yeah. That's correct. We won't dispute that one. But there's something else that's rather unique about them.
They respond to change.
Respond to change. Yes, they do. They're very, very good at doing that. Any other thoughts? Yes.
All of them are very humble gentlemen.
I think some of them are not too humble. I've met a couple of them, I wouldn't call them humble. But they probably think they are, but in real life they're not, a lot of them. Okay, any other thoughts?
They're all missionaries.
Sorry? Promoters? Dropouts, yes, no, that's right. I mean, they're dropouts for, actually getting pretty close to the answer, they're dropouts for a specific reason. I'll put you out of your misery. You tend to think that's a disability, but those guys have turned it into a real ability. And that, in many ways, is what change is about, is turning what appears to be a disability or a challenge into a big negative. Now, these are the reasons why they've turned it into a sort of an ability or an advantage, because the skills they've had to learn to handle it means they're used to failure. They were hopeless at school. A couple of them say they can still have the scar marks on their hands from the teachers hitting them because they knew they were bright but thought they were lazy. They're slow readers, therefore they have to go for just the vital information. And they prefer the face-to-face meetings so they can see the non-verbals. The non-verbals are the important parts of communications. People like Kerry Packer, there's no sense writing a memo to him. You have to sit down and talk across the table, and that's when he can eyeball you and determine whether you're stretching the imagination or telling the truth. Also very good at delegating, and they think differently, therefore they're very creative. So that's an interesting situation where dyslexic people are thought to have a disability, but where some very successful people have turned it into a huge advantage. Okay, I'm going to try and, there's a heap of stuff I want to go through, but the red stuff's the stuff I'm going to try and get through in half an hour. Please, Mr. Chairman, you let me know when the half an hour's up. So, a bit of a definition of trend. Change recently started to link very strongly with project management, and also when we look at neuroscience, which is a new field which has taken the art out of change, put the science there, and then we'll look at some 9 basic human instincts and evolutionary psychology. I don't think we'll have time even to think about the others, but change covers a wide area. Okay, definition of change, doing something differently basically. And that's similar to creativity, that's why creativity is very important in change. And we spent a lot of time in the recent courses looking at creativity tools to help you be more creative. So it's a human journey. This is what people tend to neglect. Change is a human journey. You're dealing with people, not dealing with numbers or widgets, people. And the shifts in culture, attitudes and behaviours. It's not about change control, and that's where project management's had a problem with change. They think they can control it. You can't. It's more about stewardship and guiding it. Facilitation is one of the most important things in change management. If you're a person in change management, you have to be a good facilitator. And Howard Gardner was the guy who invented the multiple intelligence, different way people perform, etc. Okay, so it's a human journey of change. You're building on the past, you're not burying the past. It's a personal journey, nothing changes about your transformation. It's getting the right relationships going and getting self-awareness. It's breaking the ice, challenging the status quo. Okay? Changing inappropriate behaviours. The key one I'd like to talk a bit about is this one here, the reflectiveness. We don't do enough of that. We're all too busy. We've got to learn to take a deep breath and reflect on what you learned. So you finish a project, one of the things you ought to do, or assignment, sit down, what have you learned from that project? What helped, what hindered? We don't do enough of that. So that's something that, a skill we need to develop. We're all too busy doing things and moving on to the next project, assignment or activity, and usually repeating the same mistakes. So the art of learning how to ask a few simple questions is very powerful. And Nelson Mandela sort of used to do this when he was travelling in Europe at one stage. Every night he'd sit down with his private secretaries and say, what have I done wrong today? Please tell me so I won't do it tomorrow. And if a person like Nelson Mandela can do that, I think we can all sort of follow that lead. Okay, so it's about changing mindsets. We don't know what tomorrow's going to be like, we know it's going to be different. No guarantee, we just don't know what it's going to be like, it's going to be very different. Change is everywhere. Change is now a core competency. When I used to give these talks in Australia about 6-7 years ago, I'd lucky to get 10 people, and I'd have to invite 5 myself to make up the number. I gave one recently about a year ago, and 120 turned up, and so forth. So it's really become a core competency of organisations. And now you've got people with change management titles in their job description. This is based on the Harvard Business Review article. They looked at 30 high-profile companies that all over 100 years old. So these are not Microsoft, Google. These are ones that survived the test of time. And one of the key criteria they found was a willingness to change. And quite often not in the same industries they started in. So that's been an important sort of survival technique. Some quotes there. I think you know who Charles Darwin is. Stressing there, it's the one most adaptive to change or win, not the city, was the most intelligent. Jack Welch, he's from General Electric, he ran that very successfully for about 20 years. And so there's 2 there from Jack Welch there, which I think are quite powerful. One talks about putting the right people in the right spot. And if your change is slower inside your organisation, outside, you're heading for disaster. Noel Tichy was the guy who started the universities for General Electric. Resist change, you might win 1 or 2 of the battles, but you lose the war. Peter Drucker was sort of the management consultant guru. He's still in his 90s, writing very good stuff. Harvard Business Review you're familiar with. And that last quote's an interesting one. If you remember, NASA many years ago when it first started had to find a biro that would work in zero gravity. They spent millions of dollars, ended up a very complicated pressurised nitrogen thing. What do you think the Russians used? Pencil, slate. So it's all about where is your mindset. Quite often the answer's in front of you, but you're in the wrong mindset. And you can be hung up on technology. And another example of that is in the Gulf War, when the Saddam Hussein was retreating was the Gulf War I, when Saddam Hussein was retreating back into Iraq. He set a fire to most of the oil fields. The Americans wanted to use expensive explosives to blow up the fires. The Bulgarians said, don't be silly, just get a big tractor, and a blade on the front and a fireproof vest, and push earth across it. So quite often we get hung up too much in technology when the answer is a lot simpler than that. So it's a mindset. You've got to be. Levels of change: personal, group, organisation, environmental. Obviously the area I tend to concentrate is on the organisational, but you can't divorce the others. They're all linked. Neuroscience is put from the science behind the art of change management. For a long time people said, change management, where's the research to back it up? There was a trial and error, hit and miss. But now neuroscience, with the study of the brain, is really putting some powerful research into why you react the way you do, and you've got a choice of either working with the brain or against the brain. And this is linked in with evolutionary psychology, the 9 basic human instincts. Also, storytelling is underrated. You remember the good stories, but you don't necessarily remember the 6 dot points on the PowerPoint. You look at all good leaders, they're brilliant storytellers. Tell good stories. We have cognitive bias in our decision making, we all make thinking mistakes. Collective behaviour is becoming more important. That's why I'm studying the social networks. They're great examples. And if we have time, we'll talk about motivation and persuasion. This is linked in with chaos theory, complexity, volatility, and with the internet, the speed of information transfer. So the whole thing reinforces that change is very situational. Just because it worked last year doesn't mean it's going to work this year. Just because it works in server doesn't mean it's going to work in NAND. So it's very situational. There's an increasing focus on soft skills and project management. We'll talk a bit about that. And social media is a great tool for communications, especially in change. You've got to use it. It's probably getting it just as powerful as the coconut wireless. So change management is recognised as a profession now. It's a job description, job titles. When I first started in the 1990s, socially you didn't mention you were a change manager because it was like at that stage Australia was going through a lot of downsizing, and that was linked with change. And so basically you have to be very careful who you talk to saying you're a change manager because they thought you're a downsizer. So it's a generational shift in places like Australia. A lot more young people are now getting into it. Also, there's a lot more outsourcing and people going in on contracts to change for a specific period in companies. So looking at neuroscience, and this is all in the last couple of years, this is all pretty powerful stuff. It's integrating the way the brain and the mind works. They actually now study blood flow and electrical impulses in the brain. So they give activities and then they study what part of the brain reacts and how it reacts. And it's very, very interesting stuff coming out. That's your brain, believe it or not. This is the part that's most important in change, the frontal lobe, and it's the most recent development of your brain, and makes us different to most others of species in the animal kingdom. Okay, so changing behaviour is interesting because only 1 in 9 people who undergo heart surgery actually change their lifestyle. And I mean, having heart surgery is a pretty heavy thing to have, but only 1 in 9 actually change their lifestyle after. Yet they've got incredible motivation to change because it's probably death threat. So changing other people's behaviour is even harder, and changing a group's behaviour is harder still. But neuroscience is telling us how to do it. So you've got the 3 main functions of the brain or the mind. You've got the automatic reptilian function, that's the breathing. You just don't have to think about it, it just goes on, happens. Next is your routine, the things that you do the most. If you remember the first time you drove a car, it was hard work, really hard work, because your brain didn't have the connections to handle it. It's probably even harder for the person next to you teaching how to drive. But it really is hard work. How are we going for time? Okay. So that's the routine. That's the part of the brain that prefers to work in. Darwin used to say, I have a new idea, I didn't write it down, within 20 minutes my brain had found a way of forgetting it. So when you get to the executive function, which is the prefrontal cortex, that is the part of the brain that uses the most energy. The brain is an energy saving device based on its historical development in the caves and on the savannah. So it prefers to go to the routine things. And that's one of the reasons why change is hard, because you're pushing it into the executive function area, which it doesn't want to go into. The brain is very energy hungry. It's only 2% of the body weight, but 20% of its energy is used there. So it doesn't, for survival mode, it doesn't want to go into that prefrontal cortex. You have to push it in there. And also that's also the part of the brain that feels physical pain. So that's why you're linked in and why the brain doesn't like change. So the whole brain approach, not the left and right brain. Also, the brain is 80% water, so you've got to keep your water levels up. That's why drinking water regularly is important. Also, you've got to keep food up to it. As food goes into a sort of shutdown mode. It takes about 15 minutes from the time your food hits your stomach to chance for it to get to the brain. So lack of energy and water impact, result in poor decisions, choosing impulsively. It has a bad effect on your brain because it goes into a sort of a seizure, basically, a shutdown mode. That's why, if you're in change, make sure people are drinking and eating properly. Otherwise, you're fighting against the brain. Also, it's an error detecting device. It's default mode, because basically, in the caves in the savannah, you know, you take a risk there, it was life-threatening. You take a risk now, it might be career-threatening at the worst, but it's not life-threatening. So it's very conscious of threats. Threats dominate rewards. It thinks, that's why when you talk about change to a group, the first thing they think about is what can go wrong, the negative sides of it. So you have to find a way of throwing in rewards so that threats don't dominate it. Also, it likes to minimise danger, maximise reward, which is linked into that threat response. Also, that the foe competitor response dominates a friend. You meet somebody new, you're straight away on the defensive until you know that person. It's a social thing. It likes interaction with other brains, basically. And that social thing that you put down now is a basic need like food, shelter, and water. Like it thrives on social connections, while loneliness, it generates a threat response. It likes to be in a non-threatening environment. If you talk about ideas, you strengthen the connections in the brain for it, so that's a good idea to talk about ideas. If you just found something new, is to talk about it. And people respond great at the positive response to giving things rather than receiving. The chemicals in your body, the favourable chemicals, flow around a lot more when you give rather than when you receive. It's also like a muscle. It doesn't deteriorate with age, and this is something that sort of goes against a lot of thinking. You use it or you lose it. In other words, you don't use it like a muscle, you don't exercise it. And sleep and rest and recovery are important. These people who work long hours, 24/7, and do it for 2 or 3 days, their thinking skills is like a person who's drunk after about 3 days of long hours. We don't reward people who are drunk in the workplace, but we tend to reward people who work crazy hours. And your efficiency just falls off. When I'm working in the evening, I'm tired, I go and have a sleep. Or go to bed and get up earlier and give the brain a rest, and the brain's still ticking over on the problem, and by getting up earlier, quite often you come back with a better answer, and so forth. So sleep is a very important thing. The brain needs it, and that's sort of being available 24/7. It's just working against the way the brain wants to do it. If you are tired, the best thing you can do is go and have a power nap for 10 minutes. Don't have much longer than 10 minutes, because you'll go into a deeper sleep. And there's unlimited plasticity in the brain and connectivity. In other words, the older you get, the brain shouldn't deteriorate if you challenge it and use it differently. That's why I say older people learn new languages, challenge it, and so forth. And that sort of goes against the sort of current, philosophies and trends. If you want to improve your connections, you've got to focus on something and use all your sensory inputs, your sight, sound, and smell. When cells fire together, they wire together. And the importance of repetition. You look at sports people, why do they practice and practice and practice? Because it gets the right connections in the brain. They don't have to think about it. It just happens. And so on. And the real conflict in sport going on now, when a person gets tired, then they have a problem. it goes into another area, and that's why they've got to keep the food up to them. You'll see people eating at half times and three-quarter times, etc. If a brain prefers questions on solutions than questions on problems, it sees questions on problems as a threat, therefore it goes into that defensive mode. So rather than giving advice what to do or what not to do, you've really got to help people think about solutions. You've got to reduce distractions and task switching. If you're swapping around tasks, that's exhausting the brain. The brain has competing parts in it, and that's why like keeping a secret is so stressful. One part of the brain says it wants to tell people, the social part, and the other part says it wants to keep that secret. It likes certainty, it favours novelty. Be curious and show interest. I mentioned about the same part of the brain. Fairness too. The brain has a thing about fairness. It might sound a bit strange. The right hormones whiz around in fairness, and you have a reward response rather than a threat response. You can over-arouse the brain and it reduces performance. The right amount of arousal is hard. Imagination is just as powerful as doing. That's why visioning is important. You can actually get the connections going in your brain by imagining it, rather than not actually doing it, by imagining it. If you're going to get an insight, your brain has to be quiet beforehand. You have to, that's why the reflection in what they call a mindless state is pretty important. And I think that's why a bit of alcohol is probably the same thing. A little bit of carb is nice, but too much of it probably pushes you too far. Because quite a few people say, I had a glass of beer and I thought of an idea, etc. And you've got to think big picture, and humour is important. Humour is one of the ways of getting the brain to jump out of its normal thinking patterns, because it's the punchline that makes people think differently. Reduce anxiety, simplify the problem to a few words. So don't crowd the brain. The short-term memory of the brain can only hold limited amount of information, and you've got to find ways of reducing. That's why you should write things down a lot. Don't necessarily rely on your memory, because all you're doing is cluttering your short-term memory. It has to go in long-term memory to try and find the information. That's very energy expensive. No such thing as multitasking as far as the brain is concerned. It can't do more than one thing at a time, but it can do things in a sequence. You've got to be careful, cause bottlenecks, you don't clutter up the brain.